Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. We will read a book from Number of Stars by Lewis Lowry as an introduction for you to meet a very brave little girl who is a national hero, who said who has saved countless lives. The entire book is available at your local library and worth reading. Now it is my pleasure to read to you this short introduction to a memorable book. How brave are you, little Anne-Marie? Uncle Henrik asked his 10-year-old niece. It is 1943, and to Anne-Marie Johansen's life in Copenhagen is a complicated mix of ordinary home and school life, food shortages, and the constant presence of Nazi soldiers. Bravery seems a vague virtue, one possessed by dragons slaying knights in the bedtime stories she tells her younger sister Christy. Too soon she herself is called upon for courage. As the German troops begin their campaign to relocate all the Jews of Denmark, the Johansens take in Anne-Marie's best friend, Ellen Rosen, and pretend she's part of the family. Alan and Anne-Marie must think quickly when three Nazi officers arrive late one night and question why Ellen is not blonde like her sisters. Through Anne-Marie's eyes, we see the Danish resistance as they manage to smuggle almost the entire Jewish population, nearly 7,000 people, across the sea to Sweden. In this tale of an entire nation's heroism, Lewis Lowry reminds us there is pride and human decency in the world even during a time of terror and war. As the two-time recipient of the prestigious John Newbery Medal for her novels Number the Stars and The Giver, Lewis Lowry conveys through her writing the profound notion that we live intertwined on this planet and that our future depends upon our caring more and doing more for one another. Lewis Lowry is the author of more than 30 books for children and young adults, which have garnered countless honors, among them the Boston Globe Honor Book Award, the Dorothy Canfield Fisher Award, the California Young Reader Medal, and the Mark Twain Award. Miss Lowry was born in Hawaii and grew up in New York, Pennsylvania, and Japan. Now Miss Lowry divides her time between Cambridge, Massachusetts, and an 18th century farmhouse in Maine. The first chapter. Why are you running? I'll race you to the corner, Alan. Anne-Marie adjusted the thick leather pack on her back so that her school books balanced evenly. Ready, she looked at her best friend. Ellen made a face. No, she said, laughing. You know I can't beat you. My legs aren't as long. Can't we just walk like civilized people? She was a stocky 10-year-old, unlike lanky Anne-Marie. We have to practice for the athletic meet on Friday. I know I'm going to win the girls' race this week. I was second last week, but I have been practicing every day. Come on, Alan, Anne-Marie pleaded, eyeing the distance to the next corner of the Copenhagen street. Please. Ellen hesitated, then nodded and shifted her own rucksack of books against her shoulders. Oh, all right, ready, she said. Go, shouted Anne-Marie, and the two girls were off, racing along the residential sidewalk. Anne-Marie's silvery blonde hair flew behind her, and Ellen's dark pigtails bounced against her shoulders. Wait for me, wailed little Christy, left behind, but the two older girls weren't listening. Anne-Marie outdistanced her friends quickly, even though one of her shoes came united as she sped along the street called Oosterbrogade, past the small shops and cafes of her neighborhood here in the northeast Copenhagen. Laughing, she skirted an elderly lady in black who carried a shopping bag made of string. A young woman pushing a baby in a carriage moved aside to make way. The corner was just ahead. Anne Marie looked up, panting just as she reached the corner. Her laughter stopped, her heart seemed to skip a beat. Halte, the soldier ordered in a stern voice. The German word was as familiar as it was frightening. Anne Marie had heard it often enough before, but it had never been directed at her until now. Behind her, Ellen also slowed and stopped. Far back, little Christie was plodding along, her face in a pout because the girls hadn't waited for her. Anne Mary stared up. There were two of them. That meant two helmets, two set of cold eyes glaring at her, and four tall shiny boots planted firmly on the sidewalk, blocking her path to home. And it meant two rifles gripped in the hands of the soldiers. She stared at the rifles first, then finally she looked into the face of the soldier who had ordered her to halt. "Why are you running?" the harsh voice asked. His Danish was very poor. 3 years, Anne Marie thought with contempt. 3 years they have been in our country and still they can't speak our language. "I was racing with my friend," she answered politely. "We have races at school every Friday and I want to do well. So her voice trailed away, the sentence unfinished. "Don't talk so much," she told herself. "Just answer them, that's all." She glanced back. Ellen was motionless on the sidewalk, a few yards behind her. Further back, Christie was still sulking and walking slowly toward the corner. Nearby, a woman who had come to the doorway of a shop and was standing silently watching. One of the soldiers, the taller one, moved towards her. Anne Marie recognized him as one she and Ellen always called in whispers, the giraffe, because of his height and the long neck that extended from his stiff collar. He and his partners were always on this corner. He prodded the corner of her backpack with the stock of his rifle. Anne Marie trembled. "What is in here?" he asked loudly. From the corner of her eye, she saw the shopkeeper move quietly back into the shadows of the doorway, out of sight. "School books," she answered truthfully. "Are you a good student?" the soldier asked. He seemed to be sneering. "Yes, what is your name?" "Anne Marie Johansen. Your friend, is she a good student too?" He was looking beyond her at Ellen, who hadn't moved. Anne Marie looked back too and saw that Ellen's face, usually rosy-cheeked, was pale and her dark eyes were wide. She nodded at the soldier. "Better than me," she said. "What is her name?" "Ellen." "And who is this?" he asked, looking to Anne Marie's side. Christie had appeared there suddenly, scowling at everyone. "My little sister." She reached down for Christie's hand, but Christie, always stubborn, refused it and put her hands on her hips defiantly. The soldier reached down and stroked her little sister's short, tangled curls. "Stand still, Christie," Anne Marie ordered silently, praying that somehow the obstinate 5-year-old would receive the message. But Christie reached up and pushed the soldier's hand away. "Don't," she said loudly. Both soldiers began to laugh. They spoke to each other in rapid German that Anne Marie couldn't understand. "She's pretty, like my own little girl," the tall one said in a more pleasant voice. Anne Marie tried to smile politely. "Go home, all of you. Go study your school books. And don't run. You look like hoodlums when you run." The two soldiers turned away. Quickly, Anne Marie reached down again and grabbed her sister's hand before Christie could resist. Hurrying the little girl along, she rounded the corner. In a moment, Ellen was beside her. They walked quickly, not speaking, with Christie between them, toward the large apartment building where both families lived. When they were almost home, Ellen whispered suddenly, "I was so scared." "Me too," Anne Marie whispered back. As they turned to enter their building, both girls looked straight ahead toward the door. They did it purposely so that they would not catch the eyes or the attention of two more soldiers who stood with their guns on this corner as well. Christie scurried away of them through the door, chattering about the picture she was bringing home from kindergarten to show Mama. For Christie, the soldiers were simply part of the landscape, something that had always been there on every corner, as unimportant as lampposts throughout her remembered life. Are you going to tell your mother? Ellen asked Anne Marie as they trudged together up the stairs. I am not. My mother would be upset. No, I won't either. Mamma would probably scold me for running on the street. She said goodbye to Ellen on the second floor where Ellen lived and continued on to the third, practicing in her mind a cheerful greeting for her mother. A smile, a description of today's spelling test in which she had done well. But she was too late. Kirsty had gotten there first, and he poked Anne Marie's book back with his gun and then he grabbed my hair. Kirsty was chattering as she took off her sweater in the center of the apartment living room. But I wasn't scared, Anne Marie was, and Ellen too, but not me. Mrs. Johansson rose quickly from the chair by the window where she'd been sitting. Mrs. Rosen, Ellen's mother, was there too, in the opposite chair. They had been having coffee together as they did many afternoons. Of course, it wasn't really coffee, though the mothers still called it that. Having coffee, there had been no real coffee in Copenhagen since the beginning of the Nazi occupation. Not even any real tea. The mothers sipped at hot water flavored with herbs. Anne Marie, what happened? What is Kirsty talking about? Her mother asked anxiously. Where is Ellen? Mrs. Rosen had a frightened look. Ellen's in your apartment. She didn't realize you were here, Anne Marie explained. Don't worry, it wasn't anything. It was the two soldiers who stand on the corner of Osterbrogade. You have seen them. You know the tall one with the long neck, the one who looks like a silly giraffe. She told her mother and Mrs. Rosen of the incident, trying to take it sound humorous and unimportant. But their uneasy looks didn't change. I slapped his hand and shouted at him, Kirsty announced importantly. No, she didn't, Mamma, Anne Marie reassured her mother. She's exaggerating, as she always does. Mrs. Johansson moved to the window and looked down to the street below. The Copenhagen neighbor was quiet. It looked the same as always. People coming and going from the shops, children at play, the soldiers on the corner. She spoke in a low voice to Ellen's mother. They must be edgy because of the latest resistance incidents. Did you read in Der Danske about the bombing in Hellerød and Nuremberg? Although she pretended to be absorbed in unpacking her school books, Anne Marie listened and she knew what her mother was referring to. Die Frie Danske, the Free Danes, was an illegal newspaper. Peter Nielsen brought it to them occasionally, carefully folded and hidden among ordinary books and papers, and Mamma always burned it after she and Papa had read it. But Anne Marie heard Mamma and Papa talk, sometimes at night, about the news they received that way. News of the sabotage against the Nazis, bombs hidden and exploded in the factories that produced war materials, and industrial railroad lines damaged so that the goods couldn't be transported. And she knew what resistance meant. Papa had explained when she overheard the word and asked. The resistant fighters were Danish people, no one knew who, because they were very secret, who were determined to bring harm to the Nazis however they could. They damaged the German trucks and cars and bombed their factories. They were brave. Sometimes they were caught and killed. I must go and speak to Ellen, Mrs. Rosen said, moving toward the door. You girls walk a different way to school tomorrow. Promise me, Anne-Marie and Alan will promise too. We will, Mrs. Rosen, but what does it matter? There are German soldiers on every corner. They will remember your faces, Mrs. Rosen said, turning in the doorway to the hall. It is important to be one of the crowd always. Be one of the many. Be sure that they never have reasons to remember your face. She disappeared into the hall and closed the door behind her. He will remember my face, Mama, Kirsty announced happily, because he said I look like his little girl. He said I was pretty. If he had such a pretty little girl, why doesn't he go back to her like a good father? Mrs. Johansson murmured, stroking Kirsty's cheek. Why doesn't he go back to his own country? Mama, is there anything to eat? Anne-Marie asked, hoping to take her mother's mind away from the soldiers. Take some bread and give a piece to your sister. With butter? Kirsty asked hopefully. No butter, her mother replied. You know that. Kirsty sighed as Anne-Marie went to the bread box in the kitchen. I wish I could have a cupcake, she said. A big yellow cupcake with pink frosting. Her mother laughed. For a little girl, you have a long memory, she told Kirsty. There hasn't been any butter or sugar for cupcakes for a long time, a year at least. When will there be cupcakes again? When the war ends, Mrs. Johansson said. She glanced through the window down to the street corner where the soldiers stood their faces impassive beneath the metal helmets. When the soldier leave. Thank you for joining us today and enjoying Number the Stars. See you next time. Stay safe.